And we are live. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing well, that you had a nice weekend, a nice beginning of the week, and all that. And I'm very happy to have you with us back tonight for another interview. But tonight we're not having a member of the European Parliament. We're going to have a bit of a different guest tonight, and it's going to be great because MEPs we're starting to have quite a lot of them, so it's good that we get to hear people outside the institutions. And so tonight we will discuss with Professor Alberto Alemanno. So he's an Italian academic. He's teaching EU law in HEC Paris, and he's also a visiting professor in the University of Tokyo, in the Collège de Bruges, and other universities around the world. And also, on top of being an academic, he's also the founder of something that is called the Good Lobby. So he will tell us all about it. But to give you, let's say, a big idea of what we're going to discuss tonight, he has worked a lot on issues such as democratization of EU lawmaking. So basically how regular citizens like you and I can impact EU law and get EU law to change and to push something that you want. He also worked on issues such as transparency, EU reforms, etc. He's worked like on a great deal of different topics. I mean, when I was doing my research, I saw that he worked on tobacco packaging. He worked on whistleblower protection, on the Polish judicial system. So he worked on everything. He worked on many things. And so we're going to discuss all this tonight. But before we start, as usual, the reminding of the rules for those of you who would be new with us. So our guest tonight will be with us for about 1 hour. After that, he will go and enjoy the rest of his evening. And you'll be stuck after that with me for another half an hour to discuss about what you thought of the interview, answer additional questions, etc., etc. I have prepared my question as usual, and you can of course suggest your own question in the chat. But of course, as usual, stay on topics, stay civil, don't spam, and of course I'll keep an eye on your suggestion, and I will read the questions to Mr. Alemanno, Professor Alemanno, if the questions are relevant. And yeah, on this note, I suggest that we dive right into it. And good evening, Professor Alemanno. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, taking the time to answer our questions. So you heard me do my little introduction to introduce yourself. Is there anything that I forgot that you would like to add before we dive into it?
Well, as you correctly pointed out, I'm an academic, but I'm also somebody who likes to get his hands dirty. So over the years, I had the chance to pick many battles and to help a variety of civil society organizations and social movements and engage with the European institutions, which is something quite uncommon, and to challenge the conventional wisdom according to which the European Union would be opaque, untransparent, and not inclusive. I think there's so much we are missing out when we decide not to engage with the European institution. And hopefully tonight I'm going to be able to convince you about the urgent need for you to shape the European Union, because at the end of the day, Europe is about us, is us shaping it and not the other way around. But I know I need to still make such a case.
So you are an academic. Before going into the Good Lobby and all that, you're an academic. That's what you do. You're an EU law professor. What drove you towards EU law? What led you to say, okay, I'm going to specialize on the EU law and all that? What was the incentive? What was the spark for you to go into these topics?
Yeah, I think what I do and what I've been researching has to do with my personal history. I was born in an industrial city, post-industrial city in the north of Italy. No social mobility whatsoever, coming from a pretty modest background. And all of a sudden, I realized that if I could learn one language, at the time French, my life would have changed, because instead of having one opportunity to find a job or buy a house or meet a partner, I would have suddenly had many more, at the time 15 opportunities. So basically, I saw Europe as a multiplier. It just happened to me, and then I follow my passions, my gut instinct, which was basically to find out how to shape the European Union, how to make Europe a people's project, as I often say. And since then, over the last 20 years, this has been my mission, is also my life. Being an Italian living in Spain and working in France and in Belgium, I feel Europe every single day on my skin, and this is out of rhetoric, is really my life. And not because I'm a privileged person, simply because I'm a regular citizen who has encountered Europe at some point. And there are millions of people like me and many others who might become like me and you, perhaps, and therefore that's the message I try to carry every single day with my work.
And so within your work as an academic, what are your main topic of research? Like what are the things you focus on mostly?
Well, I always been teaching European law as an entry point for any citizen, any organization to shape decision making. So I'm quite a specialist in European decision making. So how decisions are taken in Brussels, how the institutions work, who sit there, how we can guarantee some probity and ethics in the way in which those decisions are taken. And more broadly, I think the common theme of my research has always been how to make the European Union more democratic. So what we call the democratization, how we can make the European Union look a little bit more like the state we know so well, so as to enable millions of people to understand how can find their place into it.
And so what sets you a bit apart is that beyond being an EU law professor, you launch an initiative which is called the Good Lobby. So could you explain a bit what is the Good Lobby? What it is there for? How does it work? What it is?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Good Lobby is a non-profit organization that has started a new movement aimed at equalizing access to power. So basically, given the fact that very few of us are able to influence decision making, because usually the big corporations have a greater voice, they're better organized, they have access to power, I thought, well, why don't we mobilize many people who have some expertise, some talent, some desire for change, and basically find a way to bring them into the decision making. It could be at the European level, it could be at the national, at the local level, but this is basically what we do at the Good Lobby. We have an office in Brussels helping thousands of organizations to get into the day-to-day decision making. When you come to Brussels, you don't know which door to knock, right? There are 50 buildings of the Commission, there are several buildings of the Parliament and other institutions. So we help them navigate the Brussels bubble by basically giving visibility to those processes and helping them to file a petition to the European Parliament to start an ECI, a European Citizen Initiative, which allows 7 citizens coming from 7 countries to ask the European Union to act or to stop something. And we try to do this also at the national level. So the Good Lobby also has an office in Paris, doing the same in France. We have an office in Milan, doing the same in Italy. And now we are opening an office in Madrid, trying to do the same thing in Spain. So we are trying to grow in a natural way, in an organic way, to leverage on the communities which are already mobilizing at the local level and giving them this toolkit that basically allows everybody to become a lobbyist, a citizen lobbyist, and we claim there's nothing to be concerned or to be embarrassed about. Everybody has to lobby because lobby is part of our experience of life. It's about influencing decision making, allowing people with power to listen to you, to your preferences, and that's exactly what democracy is about. It's about participation. So lobbying is a form of participation.
And so all the people that you help, they are citizens. They are not like established NGOs. It's only like let's say groups of citizens, or how do you select the people you will help as the Good Lobby?
It's quite a diverse group of people and organizations. We have been working, and we still do, with established organizations, animal rights organization, consumer groups organization, transparency, openness, tax justice, but also with social movements, also with grassroots citizens who individually want to bring change, as well as sometimes progressive companies, companies that they want to become more responsible when they engage with the political process. We work with foundations, philanthropies who are helping their own grantees, meaning NGOs, people who support, to become better at gaining the attention of decision makers, of policy makers, of politicians. That's basically what we do every single day. And at the end of the day, the way in which we pick those organizations is very bottom up. The people who find out about us, they say, well, we have a need, and we check whether this is aligned to our values. And our understanding of social justice is pretty horizontal. We try to help everyone insofar as their mission is somehow not unconstitutional, but it's something that finds some consensus within society. So we would not help an organization to stop reproductive rights for women, but we certainly help young activists working on climate at the moment. So we are a pretty much progressive organization, which doesn't have necessarily its own agenda, but we enabling others, people and organizations to pursue their mission.
So as the name implies, you're called a good lobby. So by opposition, you could argue that they are bad lobbies. So what do you call a bad lobby in comparison to you, for instance?
Yeah, we often get this question, and the answer is that everybody can be a good lobbyist. It is not a prerogative of my organization or nonprofit groups, NGOs, even a corporation, even a nasty one in terms of what he's doing could be a good lobbyist. So good lobbying is basically trying to use this opportunity to meet a politician, to provide data, information to him and to her in a way which is clean, which is transparent, first of all, which is accountable, and which is traceable. Because again, we start from the assumption that lobbying is a legitimate form of participation because it contributes to better decision making. What we see nowadays is that when big decisions are taken, affecting our life, affecting the future of the planet, the people in the room, the people influencing policymakers tend to be the usual suspects. Specialized groups pushing for their particular interest, usually corporations, sometimes groups which represent minorities, but not necessarily the diffuse interests like public health, consumer protection, or the environment or climate. And that's where we try to step in and to say, well, everybody should be have a seat at the table. And those companies, those corporations who embrace our model, so they are concerned about being able not to be the only one having a chat with a politician, but allowing others to be around the table and even exercising self-restraints by saying, perhaps I should not meet this MEP, I should not meet this member of parliament or this commissioner or this ministry because not everybody's in the room. Well, that person is probably a good lobbyist.
So if I understand the way you describe lobbying is a bit, you see it as a bit of a toolbox. So it's like, it's a bunch of tools that can be used for good, for bad, as long as it's transparent. So there is no like there is not the assumption that lobbying is bad, it's associated to corruption. We're going to talk about Qatargate later, but you don't work on this assumption that lobbying is a bad word, so to say.
Rather the opposite. We challenge this conventional wisdom according to which lobbying would inherently be against democracy. We actually argue and demonstrate that lobbying is good for democracy, meaning the greater the number of people talking to policymakers, the more representative that society will be and the better the policy process will be. It sounds a bit counterintuitive, but actually we have a lot of evidence suggesting that lobbying is a legitimate form of participation. Governments, parliaments want to be lobbied. They look for outside people to talk to because they need to understand what is going to be the impact of their decisions on society. And the only way to do so is to listen to actors, organizations who actually have the direct experience. Think about what happened during COVID. This was the best example showing that everybody in that particular moment had something to say to the decision makers because everybody was experiencing lobbying, experiencing COVID on their own skin, and therefore their experience had to be taken into account in those urgency decisions.
I have a first question from the chat is, don't you think there is a deficit in lobby groups representing citizens compared to large company? And then how do you balance this representation of, let's say, citizens and then companies in general, and then especially large company?
This is correct. When you look at for instance, the number of meetings taking place in Brussels, but in any other European capital, from Paris all the way to Helsinki, you will see that the vast majority of meetings taking place between government or the European institution and third parties entails the participation with industry groups. And only 20-25%, according to Transparency International Integrity Report, do entail the participation of student association, trade unions, and citizens. So clearly there is a David and Goliath battle, and that's why our mission as an organization is to equalize access to power. We want to make sure everybody will get access to power because we work on the assumption that if everybody will be listened, well, the decision maker, the politician will take a better decision, which is better reflecting the different interests which are in society and somehow deliberating about the pros and cons of different options. At the moment, this is not happening because structurally, not everybody is listened because not everybody has the chance to get the ear of the policymaker.
So how would you balance things out? Like, would you say, okay, there has to be a quota, you have to meet only a certain amount of companies and corporate, and you have to meet the exact same number of NGOs and citizen representative? How do you deal with that? Bearing in mind, like, for instance, if we speak about the European Parliament, you have to deal also with the principle of freedom of the mandate, so that MEPs are supposed to be free to meet whoever they want and to take their own political priority. So how do you even, let's say, the level playing field?
Yeah, level the playing field is
very Brussels language, I know.
It's the best summary of my research over the last 15 years. I've been trying to level the playing field when it comes to access to the European decision making. And what I've been trying to do together with hundreds of people has been to basically fill the gap by allowing and helping NGOs to become more professionalized when they meet decision makers, to be slightly less ideological, and to play the system as opposed to play outside of the system. So this is our major intervention. We do a lot of pro bono matching. What does it mean? It means that we help NGOs to meet professional lobbyists and lawyers who work on a pro bono basis, that means for free, on specific projects. And this is basically where the good lobby comes from. Since 2015, we have been serving and already produced the equivalent of 5 million euros of free services we've been providing to NGOs, in particular at the European level. And now we are replicating this model at the national level. But we also do more. We also do advocate for better rules of the game by, for instance, pushing for a proactive duty of the MEP, of the European Commission, that they should create the conditions for everybody to be in those consultations. Nowadays, the European Commission is obliged to open a consultation. That means to launch a public debate every single time a new initiative is started. It's something that no member state has as a rule. But the problem is that the people who show up in those consultations are always the same. So a proposal we made has been to connect the citizens and civil society organizations with the European Parliament Research Service, that basically publish and prepares a lot of reports. Not all of them are public, only some of them are public, and to disclose them so as to create more knowledge and more evidence base. But we go even further. We really think that today we should develop what we call lobbying aid. In the same way there is assistance judiciaire, legal aid. If you cannot afford a lawyer in front of the court of your case, well, the state is going to pay for it. Why not to have the same system for lobbying? You're pushing for a particular cause. It might be climate change. You want to have greater action and stricter standards. Why you should not be allowed to basically be assigned a lobbyist who is going to help you out in your battle, and to have this as a part of your lobbying aid? I can go on and on. There are a lot of ideas we've been promoting and pushing for over the years, and we see a bit more understanding. More people understand what we mean by level the playing field in this space, and there is some room for possible reforms when it comes to equalizing access to power, both at the European and the national level.
A second question from chat, and that goes back a bit on the idea of this uneven level playing field. So there is an advantage to let's say, large corporation and corporate lobbies in general. So the question is, does that mean that the EU itself is more controlled by these companies and than rather a democratic mandate? So it's more like the EU is working only for corporate and not for the democratic mandate? Or is it for you like a preconception that is wrong? And
Well, historically, we know that the European integration process has been shaped more by corporate power in nation states than by citizens, by public interest groups. We have plenty of evidence, we have plenty of literature, books, monographs showing the undue influence that corporations had in order to shape the policy process. At the same time, this alone does not explain where the European Union stands today. Otherwise, it would not have the highest standards for emissions, or the highest standards for food safety, or for pesticides use when you compare it with other jurisdictions around the world. So despite this undue influence and this higher presence of corporate power, policymakers in Europe managed to advance an agenda which is quite of public interest. So overall, I think there have been examples, certain areas in which the Union has been more, let's say, captured by corporate power than others. And certainly its policy would today be much more aligned to citizens' expectations if the citizens' demand would be better represented in the policy process. So this is a continuum. It's a process which lacks a political debate. One of the reasons why corporations could be so powerful in Europe is because at the end of the day, politicians were not as accountable as they are at the nation state, because their procedures, their names are simply resonate less with the average citizens. And this somehow explains some of the scandals we've been witnessing over the years, in particular the last one.
Well, the perfect transition. My next question was actually about the latest scandal that is rocking Brussels and particularly the Parliament, the European Parliament these days. It's the Qatargate, which is the corruption scandal where we have seen a number of current and former MEPs being involved in corruption allegations from foreign powers such as Qatar or Morocco. So there's been following that a lot of discussion around transparency or lobbying and the rules about it. So what's your analysis of the Qatargate? Is this something that surprised you, or was it something to be expected according to you?
Well, I was caught by surprise by the scandal because of its own nature and scale. We already had a few scandals over the years in which some members of parliament received money in order to advance a particular position. In other words, they were not lobbied, they were simply the object of corruption. These are two different things, but it's not always easy to see where lobbying ends and where corruption begins, because there are instances of institutional influence. So basically, you are trying to use your position in order to gain a particular personal advantage. And I've been studying this for over 10 years. So in 2019, I've been designing an ethics body, which everybody now is talking about and many are promoting. And at the time, the idea was to strengthen the European ethics system by simply clarifying when exercise of lobbying would not only be allowed, but simply no longer be under the radar, because it would become an area of full control. The European Parliament in particular has been historically the weakest link in the European ethics system because its members have been pushing back the adoption of basic rules, like the idea that they should not have another job when serving the public interest, which creates a situation of inherent conflict of interest. Because if you are paid to work as a lawyer or to work as a consultant, or you sit on the board of a particular company, and you're also called upon to vote on a particular policy which might advance or might detract the interest of that company, of your client, there is a tension between your personal interest, you're paid by that individual, while at the same time, you're also serving the public interest. You're getting a salary in order to work on behalf of your citizens. And this is a situation which even today, 2 months and a half after the scandal, we see not finding much consensus because nobody today is saying that MEPs, members of parliament, should not work during the mandate. But there are many other situations which I think show how the European Parliament has been caught unprepared by this corruption scandal. The fact that MEPs are free to meet everybody in the name of the so-called freedom of mandate, as you said, because they want to inform their opinion without necessarily having to disclose those meetings. And I've been arguing for over 10 years that in reality it's possible to guarantee the freedom of those people. They can meet everybody. The politicians should meet everybody. When they do so, they should still declare and disclose who they are meeting. And this is a possible way to reconcile their freedom with the legitimate interest of the constituency, to know who these people are actually meeting and to actually go towards what we call the legislative footprint. So to imagine a situation in which when the regulation or directive is adopted, there will be a list. Who are the people who have been influencing whom during that process? This is the kind of ideal world I've been advocating and pushing for.
And beyond that, what would be your recommendation? So I hear that you've been working on the ethic body already. That indeed is being discussed these days. We see that the parliament itself has been thinking about potential reforms to improve the system. But what would be your own recommendations to the institutions and parliament, but also beyond the parliament?
The European institutional response has been extremely modest so far. So the European Parliament is saying, let's make a few tweaks and adopt a few disclosure rules basically for the parliamentarians. Let's prevent these third country groups, friends groups. The Commission look relieved because it hasn't been affected directly, and the Council is basically saying, is the Parliament problem? So this is not really advancing the needle. My first point here and recommendation would be, let's acknowledge that this happened to one political party, but it could have happened to virtually everybody. And we see that many new revelations are involving other people coming from different parties. So this is a common challenge, is a common problem. I would have humbly acknowledged that the rules of today are not good enough, and therefore they need a completely rehaul. And then, and last, I would also argue that what the European institutions should say is that they're not the only one who are responsible for the ethical and the probity of their members. This is a shared responsibility. First of all, national parties select the candidates, those running for the European Parliament. So they should have the burden of picking the right one and developing the right monitoring scheme once they are selecting those candidates. And once they are elected and they join a European political group, well, the political group itself should have a monitoring system, an ethics system, and sanctions in case of misbehavior. And last but not least, it should then come to the European institutions to have their own rules. But this should be really the last resort for those rules in order to prevent the wars from happening. Exactly what happened with the Qatargate. It could have not happened if we had better national party rules, if we had better European political party groups, if we had European political parties rules, and if we also had better institutional rules. And finally, this is a shared liability because also civil society organization and watchdog and media, investigative journalists should keep this kind of level of accountability on these elected individuals. And that's exactly what is lacking in a European Union, which doesn't have a fully mature public sphere and which doesn't have a fully mature political system.
In the reaction to the Qatargate, something that we've seen over the past couple of weeks is notably one party, the EPP, so the Conservatives, focusing a lot on NGOs and being quite critical of NGOs, saying that the weak link in this whole scandal are the NGOs, and so there should be more rules around NGOs, around their funding, etc., etc. And on the other side, on the left, there's been an attempt to minimize this implication of NGOs. So. In your opinion, is there an NGO factor or a loophole to close, or it has nothing to do with NGOs?
I think it has nothing to do with NGOs insofar as the NGO that was at the base of this scandal was not a real NGO. It was not registered in Belgium. It was not registered in the Transparency Register. It was cutting the corners in his own interactions, and it was basically the one-man show of a former MEP. So this is a story of a former MEP abusing of his power, abusing of his access to both the parliament as an institution and as an ecosystem of power, and using an NGO as a vehicle, as an instrument. But again, it was not a real NGO, it was a fake one. And there are not so many fake NGOs. There might be a few, but I don't think this is the problem. The problem is happening in the way in which this particular political class has been using that instrument in order to reach that particular result, which was a personal one. So I think there is a risk of instrumentalization of civil society in order to create rules and frameworks which might actually shrink the civil space. It might actually create a chill effect on the creation of non-profit organizations whose job is to advance the public interest in 99% of more of the times.
I have a couple of questions from the chat. I'll start with the easy one, let's say. So the first, it's more comment, like saying that the definition of what is an NGO is maybe a bit too broad. So maybe there should be more precise terms to say, okay, what is an NGO, what is not an NGO, based on their activities. That's something that you agree, or the definition is fine when it comes to NGO?
Well, in reality, there is no definition of NGOs. This is a residual category, but each European country has its own legal instrument. It could be an association, it could be an association, it could be any kind of legal entity. In Belgium is called ASBL, for instance, that allows citizens to come together and to promote a particular cause. And each country has its own rules, and those rules exist, and they should have prevented an abuse as it occurred in the case of Mr. Panzeri, who is the masterminder of the Qatargate. What is lacking certainly is a pan-European status for NGO, and that's what many civil society have been advocating for, but there's been a lack of political agreement. So to enable citizens to create not only a national NGO, but to create a European NGO, meaning a non-profit organization which is pursuing its mission in the public interest and acting all across the European Union. And, if we had this, possibly organizations that were created in the past would have found a better way to defend themselves when countries have been pushing back against them, because sometimes NGOs, they play a very uncomfortable role vis-a-vis the political class, and they are antagonistic to power, and therefore they are not always loved. Some others, they provide services, and they should be able to provide services also across the union. So there is certainly a case for reform, but not to make a step back, rather to make a step ahead, which is basically Europeanizing civil society.
So now for the, let's say, more wider question. So we understand that there is a gap in accountability when we're talking about parties and the transparency and in the institution. So, but the question is, which institution for you is the most ripe for lobby reform? We know that the council has little transparency, so could they be convinced to do more? Because Qatar has been, if we talk about Qatar, but Morocco as well, has been lobbying everywhere. NGOs can be influenced through funding. Academics can be manipulated as well through funding. So where should we act first, let's say?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said earlier, there's no doubt that the European Parliament it has been historically this weakest link by refusing the introduction of rules that would render the activities of the MEP much more accountable, but also more understandable, to their citizens. So there is a strong case for an upgrade of the rules of the game, and in particular, the enforcement of those rules. So my research over the years has proven that the European Union ethics system, so the rules that apply to all institutions, including to a certain extent the council and directly for the perm rep, and therefore their national system, is quite good, is not bad at all when compared to other jurisdictions. But the problem is that the enforcement of those rules, meaning their application, has historically been put into the hands of political power. So it is the president of the European Parliament, it is the president of the European Commission that has to decide whether a particular conduct has been unethical. And this introduces an ethical evaluation, which is colored with political tints instead of being judicialized, instead of being a legal obligation. And this is deeply problematic because it weakens the credibility of the ethics system. And this is exactly what is lacking in today's reform. Nobody in the political parties, even those who are pushing for reform today, are saying that we should have a better enforcement system by establishing an ethics system capable of actually monitoring, surveying, and also having investigatory power and finally sanction power that dissuade or create a new political culture that would prevent those kind of accidents from happening. So we should monitor, because there is a high risk that Qatargate, despite all the headlines and the public reaction to that, might not translate into genuine political reform, but just into a few cosmetic tweaks that might satisfy the public opinion in the short term, but it might actually backfire, because we should remind everybody that only in 16, 17 months there will be European Parliament election. And the big question will be why European citizens should actually vote in those elections if the EU is not capable of creating accountability mechanism, capable of encouraging citizens to actually play a role in defining which direction the EU should take.
So you said that the parliament is, let's say, the weak link in the institution, and like the MEPs, it's true, have been not so keen on having additional rule and strict enforcement of rules around transparency, lobbying, and all that. But coming back to the council is often described as a black box in the EU institution. I mean, council refuses any and all kind of regulation when it comes to transparency, notably because it sees itself not as a political institution, contrary to Commission and to Parliament, but as a diplomatic institution. So, do you think there is also a problem of how the council sees itself, or do you think that it's normal that the council itself sees it a bit as an extension of the foreign ministries of their respective countries?
Well, there's no doubt that the other culprit is the council. The council is the weakest link, not of the ethics system, but is the weakest link of European democracy. So there is even a greater case for intervention, but not necessarily because of the ethics rules. There is a problem there. The problem is basically transparency. We've been studying this phenomenon that we often call European bashing. The lack of transparency within the council basically allow governments to say in the capital they might be actually taking a particular instance, let's say, in favor of a proposal and actually voting against, or vice versa when they are in Brussels. This lack of accountability in the political process is deeply concerning. There have been a lot of litigation, including by an organization I had the chance to support, which is Access Info Europe, in which we managed to ask the court to basically impose the full transparency in the voting. We want to know which country voted against, which country voted in favor. However, we still struggle. In a recent case, the Capitani case, the Court of Justice pushed further by basically saying to the Council that there should be greater disclosure in access for the documents, the decisions they take in order to increase accountability. But I must say, it is a difficult struggle. My recent paper, only a week ago, a recent paper I wrote, I presented in Brussels, it looks at how we can potentially increase the accountability of the Council during this so-called rotating presidency. So in this very baroque system, every 6 months, a member of the European Union is basically defining the agenda of the European Union. And during that period, most of these member states do accept sponsorship. So you might have a particular sponsorship, let's say the French presidency being supported by the Stellantis group, which is making French cars, basically, even though there are Italian and other investors there. And this creates a perception of lack of influence in the way in which those decisions are taken. And the way we could intervene and step in are very limited, because most of these activities, they fall, as you correctly pointed out, under the national competence. These are diplomats acting within their own jurisdictions, within their own rules of the game, and there are not many entry points for the European Union to argue we need common rules when a rotating president is taking place so that we can create greater accountability. So in other words, there's a bit of a legal issue we face when expecting the Council to be as accountable as the Commission or the European Parliament. And that's something we need to all work on.
And so if we take let's say a larger view on the EU at all, how can we make the EU like more democratized? How can we put, let's say, citizens like a bit more to inside the EU decision making and make it more transparent and all that? Or how could you see that happening potentially?
Well, there are two entry points. The first one is European politics, and the second one is European participation. So I'm going to take the first one. I often ask what Europeans never do together. So Europeans do a lot of things. They travel around, they set up companies, business activities, they buy, they party, they do a lot of things together. They even marry sometimes, mixed couple. But something they never do together is politics. Politics is still the real of the nation state. So if I ask you to think about the European elections, I've been saying for 20 years now, the first time was in 1999, that Europeans vote on different dates for these European elections. The Dutch vote on Thursday, some others vote on Friday, the others Saturday and Sunday, so we vote on different dates. So there's no European Democratic Day. We vote for national parties. We vote for national politicians running on national manifestos in most of the case. So much for European politics. Everything is national. What if Europe instead had a mature European political party system? What if Europe had a European political sphere and public sphere enabling a French and a Dutch to understand what is happening in Europe instead of looking through the prism of the nation state and reading Le Monde or reading NRC? They would actually have access to this common source of information that would be reflecting on what's actually happening in Strasbourg or in Brussels. Well, we lack the counterfactual. We don't know how that Europe would look like. However, we could go there if we start Europeanizing the political process by setting up genuine pan-European parties and by having a European electoral system that allow each of us to see that there is a link between casting the ballot vote and the political color of the Commission that is going to emerge from that elections. At the moment, it is not the case. We might actually vote left and ending up, as we largely did in 2019, with a Commission which is a bit more center-right, right? How is it possible that the center of gravity of these two institutions is so different? So there are a lot of reforms we can think of, but this is not enough. We also need to push for other forms of participation beyond voting, beyond election, not only Europeanizing the political conversation and the political system, but also Europeanizing our experience of engaging with government. Europe should become an interlocutor of us citizens in the same way the mayor of our city or the prime minister of our nation state it is or represent to us. And here the European Union will surprise many of us because it offers many more tools of participation than the average member state. It offers petitions, it offers European citizen initiatives, complaints, public consultations. so many mechanisms that are not necessarily available at the nation state, but they are and exist in Europe. And my little experience over the times show that when the citizens and groups and movements and NGOs seize this opportunity by using the petitions in the right way or the ECI in the other way, it is actually possible to set the agenda. Let me give you an example, and I'm going to close on this. Today, animal rights movement have been able to collect millions and millions of signatures through European citizen initiatives. They managed to get a major restrictions of small cages for animals. They managed to get something that is going to happen now, which is basically to ban farming of animals for fur, to get a fur. And all of this was made possible in a matter of few months. In 5 months, they collected more than 1.5 million signatures to ban farming for fur in Europe, to the point they went so ahead of the game that the Commission seems to be like, wow, you made it. There is consensus. In other words, in Europe, it is possible to set the agenda with participation. And when you combine voting rights or better voting rights with better access to participation rights, you see that Europe could actually be easy to grasp for each of us. And we could actually shape Europe much more than what we want, because Europe, at the end of the day, is in listening mood, and we just have to grab it.
Let's start with the European politics aspect. So the first dimension that you mentioned in the chat. So someone is saying, but if we put everything at EU level, if we Europeanize like the election and all that, isn't there a risk like to then jeopardize or ignore like the regional or the economic differences that maybe exist between France, between Germany, between with Eastern Europe and all that? If we say okay, you don't vote for les Républicains, ULR in Romania, etc. You're voting just for DPP or for Renew. Is there a risk that then you let's say ignore or level down the implication of the economic and regional differences, or do you think that it's not a concern? I mean, it's not really a risk.
It's a great question, but the answer is not to Europeanize everything. We might actually reconsider renationalizing or regionalizing certain issues, certain areas, certain competencies, but certainly Europeanizing in those areas in which the European Union should actually playing a role and is playing a role. I give you an example. Today in Europe, we see a couple of countries which are no longer guaranteeing judicial independence. It seems a very abstract thing that the judges in Poland are no longer independent. But you know, if you are married to a Pole and you divorce and you have kids, the judge deciding on the custody of that kids might actually affect you. So we are all affected by the lack of judicial independence in Poland. The same could be said in the cooperation between, a Portuguese judge and a Polish judge. Why should a Portuguese judge trust a colleague coming from Poland by knowing that that judge is controlled by the government and is not necessarily doing what she's supposed to do? This shows that what is happening in one country is having major spillover effect in other countries, but we as citizens, we don't really have much of a possibility to influence into that particular circumstances. In a way, we are victims, we are bystanders of that. The only way to overcome this is to Europeanize the issue, and by clearly saying what the European Union should do in a situation like this one. And this is not happening. And that's why we see a very pathological situation in which we have countries who might no longer receive European funding because they're not complying with Article 2 values, basically the European common values they subscribed to only a few years ago when they decided to join the European Union. So I'm not saying to Europeanize in the sense of delegating more competence to the European Union. This is not necessarily needed. But in those areas where the European Union is in charge, because we decided democratically, together with our governments, who had a majority at the time to join the European Union, well, there the conversation should be much more European. In the same way, when the same government is constraining the reproductive rights of women, well, it should be possible for other citizens to express solidarity and to see what European citizens want or would like or expect. As you can see, the stumbling block is not the regions, but is the nation state. So potentially in the future, we're going to see the nation state role shrinking and the regions actually expanding and better communicating with the European level. That's a vision for Europe that many people believe in.
One option that is being discussed and pushed actually by the parliament to try to Europeanize a bit more the European election is the question of the pan-European list. It's a proposal that the parliament has been making, so that citizens for potentially the next European elections, if council decides to do it, unlikely, would be that people on top of voting for one list that would be the list of their national parties, they would vote for a list from European groups, so EPP, SND, Renew, etc., etc. Is that something that you think is a good way to Europeanize the election, or is it something that would be you think would be too confusing for citizens, or that it's not yet a good approach?
It's something I've been advocating for since 1999, when I met Franck Biancheri, the founder of AEG, the largest student association in Europe, basically the man who invented the Erasmus program. And I always found his idea extremely important, structurally important, because it would allow us to Europeanize politics in Europe. All of a sudden, everybody would feel that there is a stake when she's voting in Europe, because we would enable you not only to vote as an Italian MEP, you as a French one, or you as a Slovak candidate, but all of a sudden you would be able, as a Slovak, to vote for a German candidate and vice versa. How do we do that? Pan-European college. Instead of voting simply in your country, in the country of origin, you're going to be voting somebody all across the European Union. Some people are saying this is a bad idea because it's much easier to get elected if you're German than if you're Maltese, because there are 500,000 Maltese, but there are 90 million Germans. Well, this is an issue that lawyers and constitutional lawyers can set, by creating different thresholds and by simply making it more difficult for a German to be elected in that college. The other argument against is that these MEPs who would be elected transnationally would basically have a better legitimacy than the national one. So you would have a class A and a class B. And I think it's also a false argument, because these kind of different modalities exist in a variety of countries, including Germany or the US. So there is a lot of pushback against this idea. I'm also not very optimistic, as you are, that there is a unanimity. That's what we need, of member states accepting, voting in favor, and then ratifying this major proposal for a new electoral law, which is unfortunate, because already in 2018 we were very close to a similar proposal, but then in February 2018, a majority of member states, the European Parliament, decided to vote against this proposal. The most likely scenario will be a ratification of the 2018 electoral reform, which never entered into force, which will introduce some elements of Europeanization. So requiring national parties, when presenting their candidates, to tell you which is their European political family. So you know that perhaps you are voting for the very same political family as your friend in another European country. At the moment, there is no such a requirement. So you might be voting for your national party without knowing where do they sit in Europe, on the center, on the left, on the right. And this is deeply problematic because it creates a lack of intelligibility. It's difficult to understand and read what is happening. I have a lot of examples showing how schizophrenic countries, but national parties are, from the country level to the European one. You all remember, or you might remember, a very interesting party called Ciudadanos, which is potentially a pro-European party, liberal, very close to Macron and Renew Europe in Brussels, but flirting with Vox, which is the right-wing party in Spain. So how is it possible to imagine La République En Marche dealing with Marine Le Pen and having a deal at the national level, but then having a different stance in Brussels? I saw this happening in Spain, and I saw so many other inconsistencies happening in virtually all European countries that clearly show that we have a real problem of lack of a European political space, which is understandable and intelligible to most of us European citizens.
Another recent experience to Europeanize a bit European politics and to also bring citizens to the center of the attention as being the Conference on the Future of Europe. So this grand débat, but at EU level. In your opinion, was it a good experience? Is there things what worked there, what didn't work? Is it something that should be done again in the future? What's your take on the Conference of Future of Europe?
I had the chance to follow the conference very closely since it was announced, and I used to be very critical. I remember writing a couple of op-eds denouncing this conference of the future of Europe as yet another attempt to change everything in order not to change much. And I had to change my opinion because I realized that after 1 year, at the end of the day, Europe looked quite brave to launch a citizens process that would have somehow opened a Pandora's box, because you were there creating the conditions for citizens coming from all over Europe to be randomly selected. So these people didn't know each other. They came from different backgrounds, different socioeconomics, different political views, different experiences of Europe, most of them very little, and bring them together on 3 occasions in order to deliberate and discuss about their expectations vis-a-vis the European Union. And I must say it has been the most refreshing experience I ever had when dealing with the institutions. I met real people. They could have been my young cousin or my older aunt. And these people, they didn't have a common language. They were not able to speak the same language. Certainly, most of them couldn't speak English. They had to rely on translation, but also on serendipity. Who was around the table? Who was there? And you know what? The recommendations they put forward, 178, are extremely rich of ideas, and they basically all express one thing, a desire to understand a bit more what the European Union is doing and how it's affecting their life and how can potentially shape those decisions. And I think this is a legitimate expectation, regardless of whether you are pro-European or anti-European, whether you're a skeptic or an enthusiast. Asking the European Union to provide enough information, enough elements to understand, I think is a legitimate request. I think the best legacy of the Conference on the Future of Europe will be to institutionalize, that means to make permanent, this deliberative mechanism entailing the participation of randomly selected citizens in the day-to-day decision-making of the European Union. And that's what I had the chance to work over the last couple of years. And in a study I presented at the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago, I tried to put forward a model on how we could build this citizens' assembly made of citizens coming from different walks of life, deliberating and giving ideas in order to make the European Union more responsive to what people think and want. Yet another opportunity, as you said, to Europeanize the political space.
A couple of critiques that were made to this conference of Future of Europe was on that one end, it was a bit of a machine to create frustration, because we were telling people, yes, you will be able to change Europe, but then putting under the rug the fact that Council, for instance, would not be so keen on implementing what the conference proposed, because Council never wanted the conference on the Future of Europe to happen, and we've seen the Council indeed like blocking a number of proposals. So that's one first criticism. And then another criticism or worry that was emerging on the Parliament side was saying, careful, because if you create this conference and we start saying that whatever comes out of the conference has to become law, what is then the use, what is the legitimacy of a European Parliament in the end, if ultimately the Conference of Future of Europe, it's the Bible and whatever they propose, we have to put it without having being able to have a say as a parliament. So, what do you think that these criticisms are overblown, or is there a bit of truth in there?
Well, I think that the Conference on the Future of Europe has been a major experiment, which has opened several Pandora's boxes, and one of them is what happened when citizens get voice, so they're able to basically replace, at least temporarily, what elected individuals do, and how their input could actually be perceived and received by the decision makers. And that's where the tension occurs. So basically we witness competing claims of legitimacy. The citizens said, well, we are here and we should be listened because we have been randomly selected by sortition. We tend to be more representative than you are, because we don't necessarily come from the same political class. We come actually from different walks of life. And on the other end, you had the elected saying, no, we are the one who were elected, not you. So we are the one who should take the decisions. And in reality, it's possible to reconcile both legitimacy claims, because the two input, the one that comes from participation and the ones that come from representations, actually are complementary one to another. The citizens are not there to replace the politicians, but they're there to remind them what is actually felt on the ground, so as to inform and eventually to do exactly what we were discussing earlier, which is to equalize access to power, which is to make sure that the politicians will be exposed to many more points of view that he gets in his own decision making. That's why I'm very hopeful that deliberative democracy will be there to stay. Potentially, the major legacy of this conference will not only be make the idea of making the citizens panel as a part of day-to-day decision making, but also generating ideas which are already feeding the next electoral cycle. Now political parties in Europe are preparing their political manifestos, and it will be virtually impossible for them not to position themselves on those recommendations. And that's exactly the prediction I made in 2019, when I basically said this is going to be a genie's lamp. You know, when you take the lamp, you start massaging it, you get this beautiful genie out, and it will be impossible to put it back into the lamp. That's what we see today. There are a lot of taboos which have been broken as a result of this conference, and this is already a major merit in breaking taboos and accelerating our political and transnational political debate.
I'm looking at the time, so we're going to close, finishing this interview fairly soon. But maybe like almost a final question. Something that came up a lot during this discussion is this European Citizen Initiative. So this form of European petition, the ability for citizens to put forward an issue and to raise the attention of the Commission and try to push them to act upon it. So it's something that has been pretty controversial since its creation, because it has a very high threshold. You need to gather 1 million people from at least 7 different countries for it to be potentially acceptable, and as a result, very few European citizen initiatives have been successful, at least in terms of the threshold. I think less than a dozen, and you've worked a lot on these through these European citizen initiatives. So, is this something? Why do you want to work through this citizen initiative, and are you satisfied with the current system around the ECI?
The European Citizen Initiative has a huge potential, but it remains untapped. Why? Because we have registered 76 ECIs, which have collected around 15 million since 2012, and only 7 of them reach 1 million. What would the ECI today if instead of registering 76, we had registered 500 or 3,000 or 1 million? In other words, we never reached a critical mass. We never got the political leadership used to the idea that citizens can actually set the agenda. So we basically lack evidence to define whether ECIs are successful or not, whether they are useful or they are not useful. Up to now, very few people use them. They basically, in the most successful scenarios, have been setting the agenda. That's what we did with my students in 2012 when we registered the first ECI on one single tariff, which was the idea of creating, to get rid of international roaming. Then there was another one, but we set the agenda. We got the ball rolling, and I think that's what ECIs are good at today. But again, why we don't use them more? Because there is a chill effect. The Commission makes it very difficult for you to collect those signatures, and it might make it even more difficult now that you can collect signature on your own website. You need to go on their own. And this is somehow chilling, is pushing back people from trying. And many NGOs say, we're not going to do it, it's too expensive, we have no guarantee of success. And this is a pity. It's a pity because, again, we should use this instrument much more than we have done in the past in order to test its potential. All the rest, number of signature, modalities of collection, are little details. We need, first of all, a critical mass. So I keep pushing civil society organization and citizens to register, and currently I have a relatively new ECI that I register with other 6 citizens asking to basically have voting without borders. So allowing mobile citizens like I am, around 15 million today are citizens living in a different country than the country in which they were born, to be able to vote for the European elections and for local elections wherever they are. And if I ask you, you know how many people actually vote in the European elections among those who are mobile European citizens, meaning the most Europeans, how many of them do vote for the European elections? 5%. So 95% of them do not vote. So clearly here there is again a structural problem. When the Europeans of Europe cannot vote because it's just too burdensome and cumbersome for them to register and to be able to basically decide for whom to vote. I live in Spain, why should I vote for a Spanish representative who doesn't speak a language, who doesn't feel Europe on his own skin? When I'm a European, this is what led us to the previous conversation about the need to Europeanize the political space and to have people who could actually run for all across Europe and to be elected and to vote from all across the European Union. I think this should be the perspective. That's where the European Union should be 70 years after its creation.
And final question for you, something that has been a lot in the discussion lately, and a bit as a fil rouge in tonight's discussion, is the idea of EU reform, potential changes in the treaty. And we know that member states are very divided on the idea. Do you think that we can expect a potential EU reform, regardless of which direction it would go, fairly soon, or is it something that should be is in the fridge, in the refrigerator for quite some time? Will be in the refrigerator for quite some time.
Well, why should we change the rules of the game? Because, as we said, there are a lot of structural problems. So there is a case for reviewing a few rules to somehow matching citizens' expectations, at least those citizens who had the chance to get an exposure to Europe, like those selected in the Conference on the Future of Europe and others, and what the European political system is able to do. In other words, we need to make sure the political system is catching up with the realities of Europe. Europeans are so much integrated in terms of social, economic, and cultural issues, with more than 50% being exposed to another European country on a year basis, but the political system, as I show you, is so much national. So how can we somehow cover this match? And for this, you need institutional reforms. However, I don't think there is political appetite for reopening the rules of the game, because politically, there's not really much sense of what could be done. Reopening the rules of the game could actually mean to make a few steps back instead of actually injecting some further acceleration in political integration in Europe. So there is such a risk, and the political appetite is limited. So I belong to those who basically say, let's keep highlighting the major need for structural reforms, but let's try to do as much as we can under the current rules of the game, which is the so-called Lisbon Treaty, that is still pretty much untapped. Probably 20-30% of the Lisbon Treaty hasn't been implemented. An example, the number of commissioners. Since 2001, we don't need one commissioner per European country, so we don't need to have such a huge European government sitting, the College of Commissioners. We could actually have many less. But there has been a pact among the political class not to apply this, because each country wants to have his own commissioner. You see, that's a clear example, but having less commissioner would also mean to have a commission that looks like a bit more like a government, which is much more political, which is much freer to act from the national capitals, in particular in a moment in which the Commission, which is the only institution which has to select, identify the European interest, what is good for everybody, is increasingly controlled by the leaders sitting in the European Council, and sometimes by their own prime minister, in the case of Orban, in which the commissioner from Hungary is clearly not abiding by its own independent duty. He has a duty to remain independent, but all of a sudden it takes pro-Hungarian position. That's exactly what commissioner should not do. So let's try to get the most out of the current rules while pushing and advocating for some change in the rules, which hopefully next time will be also entail the participation of citizens. Up to now, citizens have never been involved in treaty reform, but what we experienced with the Conference on the Future of Europe is that actually some citizens could actually play a role also in the so-called constituent process, the process in which we create the rules of the game, and this will create a new push and a new legitimacy for the European Union to grow into yet another polity, or some of polities, different kind of people who want to work together, which is basically what European is and should remain. We will never become the same people. We can be different people in working together towards common goals. That's the strength of the European Union. Unity in diversity. That's our motto, and I think we should be proud of it.
That's very clear. So thank you very much, Alberto Alemanno, for taking the time to answer a question tonight. It was very interesting. Chat, make sure to thank Mr. Alemanno for his time. You can follow him on Twitter. The Twitter is just below his video feed. Stay with us. We're going to do the debriefing. Mr. Alemanno, Professor Alemanno, sorry. Thank you very much for answering your questions. I wish you a very good evening. I hope you enjoyed your first experience on Twitch. It was a very good discussion. I'm very happy that you came. And I wish you a very good evening.
Thank you for the opportunity, and to all of you for listening and engaging, and looking forward to the next conversation. Don't hesitate to reach out. Bye.
Perfect. Bye. All right, guys. Let's dive into the debrief. In the meantime, let me know your feedback, what you thought of the interview and all that. I'm closing Zoom in the meantime. Up and meeting. All right. So. Tell me everything. Sorry for those of you who made comments and questions I didn't ask them. I have to say, at some point I was looking at the time and I was like, "Ola, those are massive questions. We're gonna be there for half an hour just covering them if we go into it." So apologies for that, but I had to take an executive decision for the sake of time, because poor professor had stole the room of his daughter, so I didn't want to impose on the family any longer than that. All right. Otherwise, as usual, I have my little cahier, my little notebook, so we can cover the various topic. All right. That's a philosophical approach. Okay. I mean, if my parents never lived outside of Europe, outside of the countries, are they less European by definition? I don't think that's what he means. Like, I saw Andres also making a comment about, oh yeah, but if anything, the fact that people who live outside their country do not vote in European elections shows that they are not interested in Euro politics. Andres, you would be right, but I think what his point is showing is that people who are living outside of their country, is not, when he says that they are the most Europeans among Europeans, is not that they are the other are less European. What he means by that, at least my interpretation, is that those who live outside their countries are the ones that rely the most, that benefited the most from the European Union, because the mere fact that they lived outside their countries, the process was facilitated heavily by the fact that they are part of their country. They are in the European Union, which facilitate them going from country to country, benefiting from a number of things, that being able to work freely there, etc., etc. So let's say they are the perfect constituent for the EU. That's how I interpret this whole idea of the most Europeans among Europeans, because they are the ones that on paper benefit the most from what the European is supposed to do, which then leads to what Andres is saying, and that's indeed, you're right, saying it's indeed a paradox that the people who are on paper benefiting the most from being part of the European Union are also not interested at all in participating in EU politics. And I didn't know about the 5%. The 5% level, like of people voting for European elections among the people living outside the country, and indeed it's quite telling. So I don't think there is a contradiction there. It doesn't, like, living abroad abroad outside your country. So the fact that I live in Belgium and not in France doesn't make my parents who live in France less European than me. It's just that as someone who lives outside my home country, I'm someone who benefits more than the average, let's say, from the European Union. That's how I see things. So that should push me to be more invested in the European Union, because that's what it's in my own interest. Because as someone who lives outside my country, I have an interest in making sure that European Union still exists, and those things that benefits people who live outside their own country, such as myself. That's how I see that. I see this. Let's see, what did I miss? Ask about the council, but I meant the European Council, the leader of the states. Okay, being the least transparent. Any comment? Council, I mean, European Council and the okay. So for those of you who don't know, so you have the three main institutions. You have the European Parliament, the Commission, and the the Council of the European Union, with its full name. That's what we call the Council in short. And there is a bonus fourth one, which is the European Council. The European Council is the moment where you have all the head of state and government gathering. So Macron, Scholz, Meloni, etc. All the big boss of the EU, of the member state meeting and setting a bit the agenda for the EU. And they're a bit of a weird one because for a long time they didn't have like an official kind of status. Then Lisbon arrived and gave them an official status. But it's true that they are arguably the most powerful institution in the EU because they are really the ones that set the agenda. Like the European Council tells the Commission, okay, this is what we want you to do, and in many cases the Commission will do what the European Council want. But on the other side, it's also the institution that is probably the least transparent and has the least accountability. But I would argue that why it's true that there is not a lot of transparency on the European Council, it's indeed an institution that is more diplomatic than European politics per se. Even if they set the agenda for European politics, it's not European Council are not a daily occurrence. They do not involve like EU leaders when they meet. They're not deciding on what happens in this directive, in this regulation, or anything. They just set the meta political objectives. They say, okay, this is the priority. This is what we should work on, and the consensus among all the member states is towards through this angle. So it's rather meta, and I don't see this as necessarily like a fully like an institution that work on the daily European stuff, like the Council, like the Council of the European Union, so the Parliament, etc. So I agree that the European Council exists a bit in its own separate thing. It's indeed not very transparent, and it could be improved, etc., etc. But I will not put it at the same level as the Parliament, as the Commission, and as the Council, because it's not exactly the same beast. On the other end, I would completely argue that the Council of the European Union, so where you have the ministers and all that, it's a political institution of the EU, and so there should be actual transparency and all that. Okay, I missed a couple. I would like to have the source of this 5%. I agree. I don't know where the 5% comes from. I'm sure that because I said I'm sure. I'm not so sure because I know that, for instance, in France has like a constituency for what we call Français de l'étranger, so the French people who live outside France. So we know exactly how many people vote there. So you can have an estimate, okay, out of these people, how many voted, and so on and so forth. But I don't know if all countries around the EU have such a system, in which case, if they have, you could just say, okay, we look in all the 27, like the Français de l'étranger, and we count like what is the voting rate there. But I don't know. Indeed, it would be interesting to know where the 5% comes from. They are the ones who are actually elected and all the most responsibility. So you're talking about the European Council. That's one of the paradox of the European Council. I mean, the competition of democratic legitimacy. The biggest example is Parliament versus Council. Parliament will argue we are the ones who are directly elected by citizens for European politics, so we have actual democratic legitimacy. Council will say, and by extension, the European Council, we are the government of each member state. We are either directly elected or we are the emanation of parliamentary elections. So we are the most legitimate because we work on the daily stuff. People know us. They don't know you. They know us. They vote for us. And ultimately, the EU is the union of all member states. So as the head and as the government of each member state, we have a superior legitimacy to you. So you always have a match of legitimacy between Parliament and between Council and European Council, which, when you link to it, it's a bit a tension between, let's say, a federal, like a political European Union, in the sense of an autonomous political power, and a more nation-state driven European Union. So depending on where you sit in the argument, and by extension, where should the Commission take its order, you will lay on one side of the or the other, but both have their own legitimacy. It's one of the reasons why the criticism against the EU saying, "Oh, the EU has no democratic legitimacy." It's completely wrong, because you have at the very least two of the main three that have legitimacy. Parliament is directly elected by citizens with the European election. Council is composed of the national government, who have their own legitimacy through election, and the Commission takes its order from the two of them. In the case of the Commission, the President of the Commission, she's elected by the Parliament, nominated by the Council. The commissioners are proposed by the member states, and so on and so forth. So the legitimacy, let's say, of the EU is not something that really works actually as an argument against the EU. I would say. Elected MPs and their party have the legitimacy to form coalition and then appoint governments and end of government. It's happening in a lot of EU member states, but when it happens with the appointment of the Commission, then the legitimacy argument comes forward, ironically. Yes, I mean, again, you have this competing legitimacy when it comes to the Commission as well, because you could argue that Commission is illegitimate because it's not elected, and so on and so forth. The Parliament should decide who is on the Commission, or at least the Commission should be the reflection of the political balance at European level, namely in the Parliament. So that means that, for instance, in the Commission, so even if you have the President of the Commission has to be from, well, I mean, that's the practice right now, but has to be from the party that won the European election, the biggest party. So right now, Ursula von der Leyen, she is an EPP, so she's a conservative, and that was the one condition that Council had to take into account when decide, okay, we are nominating von der Leyen. But then when you look at the composition of a commission, it's not like a national government, because you don't have a commissioners and not all EPP or part of a coalition. You have EPP commissioners, but you also have Renew commissioners, you have Socialist commissioners, you have even some ECR commission, you have technically a non-attached commissioner with the Hungarian one. So why? Because the commissioners are appointed by the national governments, and so they don't take into account the results of the European election. And so in this sense, there is no real political let's say structure in the commission. They don't act as a government because they're not the result of a coalition setting an agenda and so on and so forth. So it's the legitimacy of the commission could be discussed, even if, and that's when you talk about the EU institution, it's full of paradoxes. Like Commission, I think it was Andres who was making the argument earlier. Yeah, the Commission is not supposed to be political; it's neutral. That was the case in the past. The Commission was meant as something that was technical. They were the technical. They were the technical body. They were just providing expertise and following the orders of the Council, because then the Council was considered as the epitome of political legitimacy in the EU and the one setting the agenda. Now, since it's been a long process, but particularly since 2014, now we talk a lot about a political commission, in the sense that the commission is asserting itself, say, okay, we're not just technocrats, the commission should not be just technocrats, we must act, we are politicians, we must be a political commission, we must put forward policies that have a political goal, that are setting clearly the Commission and the EU by extension towards a specific direction. So now the Commission is a political commission. Take now and it's something that has been fed when we have now the State of the Union speech, so the once a year speech in September. Every September you have also the President of the Commission that comes to the Parliament and makes a big speech. That sets up a bit like the political priorities for the Union for the year to come. That's the big political speech of the EU. It's as if the Prime Minister of your country goes into your national Parliament and states what it will be the political priorities. That's the same. So you see that there is a politicization of of the Commission. The Commission is now all about, the Commission has said, okay, we're going to do something about the Green Deal. And now there's a lot of things about the strategic autonomy. So the idea the EU must look out for its own interest and be as autonomous as possible, not rely on other, etc., etc. So there is now a political agenda that is set by the Commission with inspiration from the Parliament, with inspiration from the Council, but it's no longer this purely technical body that it wants, so it's not neutral. You could argue that even back then the Commission was not truly neutral because it was doing the bidding of the Council. But now the Commission is a political body in itself. It has its own agenda, and it's also like fighting also with the Parliament and with the Council, because each of the three institutions have different priorities, different agenda, etc., etc. So it's the EU is not apolitical. It's not ademocratic as some would like to say. In the end, I didn't look at all at my notebook and all that, but interesting conversation. So keep bringing it up. Let's see. In a multi-party system, the winner of the election is ultimately the one that manages to win the post-electoral negotiation that ensures majority in parliament. That's indeed one of the discussions. That's why I said the Commission at the moment, the practice is that the president of the Commission comes from the party that is the biggest after the election. But there are arguments saying that it should be more around the coalition, meaning that the Commission should be of the color that can have a majority in the parliament. So let's say that EPP wins, fine. But if then in parliament, like EPP as the Conservative as the biggest number of MEPs in the parliament, but if then you have the Socialists, the Renew, and the Greens that team up together and get a majority of the parliament together, then the Commission should be one that comes from this coalition, not from the EPP. That's not, for now, the interpretation. There is some discussion about that, but for now, even in the parliament, the consensus is to say the biggest party is the one that gets the presidency of the Commission. That's for now. That's the consensus. The consensus between the different parties. And so, whether in 2014 or in 2019, there was an agreement between the member state, between the political groups that, particularly in 2014, if the party that would win the election would get the support of all the other voice candidates. So that means that when in 2014 DPP won, they had Jean-Claude Juncker as their candidate for president of the Commission. That's what we called back then the Spitzenkandidat system. All the other parties, not all the pro-European parties, so you had the Socialists, the ALDE, so the centrists, the Greens, they all agreed, and even GUE, I even think, they all agreed that they would back Juncker. Even if Juncker is not of their party, they said, no, he won, so he's the one who has to be the president of the Commission. Even if we disagree then politically on what he wants to do, but he has the legitimacy, he's the one who needs to be the president. The political commission is the poisonous legacy of Juncker. Well, whether it's poisonous is a question of point of view. It's maybe like a legacy might be a bit exaggerated because it's been a process that has been building for a long time, and the idea of the political European Union is a process that you can date back from the late 80s, from the 90s has been the 90s and the beginning of 2000 has been the story of the slow emergence of the so-called political Europe. And Juncker was the epitome, like the real emergence, the real emergence of this political Europe. It's the incarnation. That's the first time that the Commission says, okay, now we're political. But it's not something that Juncker created per se. It's not the conclusion, but you could argue the culmination of a process of a political Europe. But it's not Juncker on his own that made that. Who made that? It was always a political body like other executive branches of government everywhere. We have to stop pretending it is not. Which one are we talking about? Commission? Yeah, Commission. Barroso was quite political in his time. He was, to be fair, I arrived in Parliament at the end of the Barroso era, so I don't remember. Like my commission for me is the Juncker Commission. Barroso was indeed political. but it was like, I would say there was a change between Barroso and Juncker in the direction, because Barroso, while he had a political point. I mean, Barroso, so the president of the commission before Juncker, so he was president from when he did 2 mandates. So that's what, 2004, 2014. He was not as outgoing as Juncker, like you're saying in intermediary, but he was still political, and he was also still like in a let's say old school kind of president of the Commission, and the old school European Commission, in the sense that he was like a bit like behind the scene. He was like very liberal, like very European Union, but old school European Union, where it was all about building the single market, pro-trade, pro-liberalism, etc., etc. He had its own backlash with the TTIP and all that, but you had this transition towards the political Europe, because he was the one, for instance, who put in place the State of the Union speech. So this big political speech at the end of every year. That's Barroso who set the tradition. I think it started it in 2012. And then you had Juncker, who was a completely different animal, because he was much more outspoken, much more autonomous, partly as a character, because Juncker is Juncker, and I mean, the guy doesn't give a shit. He has been around European politics for 30 years, so he didn't have anything to prove to anyone, so he was literally doing whatever the fuck he wanted. And also because of the way he was designated, he had legitimacy from the parliament and not from the council, which the council hated, and so he was more independent from the council than the president of the commission. So he had more leeway to do what he wanted politically. So he was more outspoken, etc. So he was the most visible, let's say, in terms of political, as a political commission. If you compare now, von der Leyen, she's political, but a different kind of political as well, because there was a, let's be saying in French, mouvement balancier. So there was we had one, let's say, not maybe non-extreme, we had one extreme with Juncker, and then it went the other way a bit with von der Leyen, because Juncker was very independent, very outspoken. He never hesitate to piss off the council and all that. Council did not like that, and so when 2019 arrived, they say, okay, we're gonna take back control a bit over the commission, even if it stays like a political body, and etc., etc. But we want someone who is closer to the council, and so von der Leyen is someone who is council pendulum swing. Thank you. Von der Leyen is someone who is closer to the council. I mean, you could argue that von der Leyen does the bidding of the council. She's there because of Macron, etc. But she's more dependent on the council than on the parliament. Even if she claims, she says, okay, of course, I want to take into account what parliament wants, etc., etc. She's very critical in the sense that she puts a lot of emphasis on communication, on public communication, with a varying degree of success, which is also a show of politicization. And within the commission, you see a big movement to have more like a more effective communication of what the commission is doing, with various degrees of success. I mean, if you look at very, let's say, very advanced DG, so the Direction Générale, basically the equivalent of ministries in the commission. You take the trade, the DG Trade, so the one in charge of trade in the commission. They are extremely good at communication. They are great. I would argue among the best in the commission when it comes to public communication. Other are much more dry, old school. They're talking just to the Eurobubble and not beyond. But yeah, all that to say that this long segue that the commission is a political institution, and it has been a process that has started a long time ago, in the 90s, and now you could argue that the combination with the Juncker Commission and the von der Leyen Commission is still political, a bit different, more relying on the council than the parliament compared to the Juncker one. Let's see. So are we talking about the public presentation of the commission being political or not? Because at the core, I mean, it is political. Mostly policy processes are political at the core, even when the political part of it happens away from I mean, yeah, of course, everything is political, for sure. But there is the political aspect of what the Commission does, the consequences of its politics, and there is the political incarnation, the Commission saying, I'm a political body, I have political priorities, like what I do is not something that comes merely out of technical expertise. It's not just the figure that justify what I do, it's because I have a political direction. I acknowledge, I say openly that I want to push the EU in a particular direction. And on that, it's something that changed from the Juncker Commission, where the Commissions came out and say, okay, we, as a Commission, we have a political persona, even if it was already the case before to an extent, but we are saying it openly. And it's an answer to the criticism of the EU not being democratic and all that. It's a way to say to citizens, the Commission is not a body that exists in its ivory tower, that does not listen, doesn't take into account what is happening outside. We are aware of what is happening outside, and we set the priorities according to that. And so then it's a matter of, okay, you agree with us, you don't agree with us, but we do that. We have political priorities. We set an agenda to do things for you because we consider that this is the direction of where the European Union should go. And then you have the debate with the Parliament and the Council, but the externalization, let's say, the expression of this political direction is an answer to the criticism about the EU not being legitimate, not being democratic, and all that. It's an attempt to do that. Problem is that it's one thing to say that, and then the other thing is to actually create a system where citizens can express this political will, their own political will, and by extension legitimize the EU institutions as a whole. Even if in the end this whole perception of the legitimacy of the institution it's a perception. If you look at it, you compare the Commission and some national governments, a national government is not necessarily more legitimate, democratically speaking, than the Commission. If I take the example of France, nobody voted for the various members of the government. Nobody voted for the ministers. They knew that the prime minister was likely going to be this person, but they didn't know for sure. They didn't, and then didn't vote it for the for the minister. And likewise, you can even make the opposite argument, that sometimes the Commission has, to an extent, more legitimacy, or there is more accountability of the members of the Commission than national governments. Like, still, if I stay with France, when the government was appointed, sure, the minister came to the parliament to say, hey, I'm the new minister, vote for me, vote for my government and all that, but that's it. There was no process of validation of the ministers. When the commission is nominated, the candidate to a job of commissioner comes to the parliament and he spends 5 hours in a committee meeting being grilled by MEPs who want to make sure that he knows his shit, that he doesn't have like a political landmine, political problems behind him, etc. So it's in the parliaments, every mandate says, okay, change this guy, otherwise we're going to vote against the commission. And every mandate there's a couple of candidate commission that have to be changed because the parliament says, if you don't change this guy or this woman, we're shooting down the commission. That's not something that you see in many national government. And so to this extent, you could perfectly argue that the European Commission is more accountable, more democratic to an extent than national governments, but it's not perceived like that. So perception of democratic legitimacy is an artificial construct. It's a matter of media. Do you have presence in the media? Because for in the eyes, the legitimacy, the democratic legitimacy of a political institution is how much can we see them? How much do we know about what they are doing in our name? And then we have a possibility to debate, etc., etc. National government, of course, they are on national television, etc. So people see them and say, okay, these people are doing things in my name. I agree, I don't agree with them, but I know what's happening. The European politics, not so much. Even if there is a change in some member states where you see a bit more commissioners, president of the commission coming to say what they are doing, explain and react to what the position of people, etc. It's not something that is that common, and so that has an impact on the democracy, the perception of legitimacy that people have towards the institution. So it's something that is not like the legitimacy of a political institution, particularly European institution, is not something that is linked only to how is the institution built, how are people designated, but it's a matter of perception. Perception creates legitimacy. And that's the whole debate around European media, around the European public space, etc., etc. And so that's something that the institution, particularly the Commission and the Parliament, are striving for. They're trying to get out of the bubble and try to reach out to people to change this perception to an extent. Anyway, completely I didn't talk about a single thing on my notebook. It's a very interesting debate, but yeah. Okay, I don't see any comments on my. I will assume that my rambling is enough. I'm looking quickly at my notebook to see if there is something that absolutely needs to be discussed. Otherwise, of course, chat is there, so let me know. We talked about lobbying a lot as part of his organization, the Good Lobby, which he considers an NGO. I think it was Itomis Derry that was asking if he considered it an NGO. He didn't mention earlier that it was an NGO for him. But it was interesting because he said, "Oh yeah, but lobbying is not a bad thing. On the contrary, it's a good thing. It's necessary. It's a toolbox. It's something that everyone should be able to use. You can use it well. You can use it wrong, as long as it's transparent." And he said, "Yeah, the Good Lobby is in a way trying to give open the access to the toolbox to more people." Do you agree with Alemanno's European election proposals? So it links a bit to the idea of the pan-European elections. It's a difficult one. In ideal world, he's right. He is right indeed. It's completely true that indeed, in many cases, the European election is just an accumulation of. It's just 20 different national elections that then send people to the European Union. So to that, I agree on that. In that it is a problem and an obstacle to the Europeanization of EU politics, and also it links back to the democratic legitimacy. Do I think that pan-European lists are necessarily the answer? I'm not convinced, but I'm not convinced on either way. I can hear arguments on both sides of the argument there. So I don't have I don't think there's a perfect solution. It makes sense that indeed it is a national election to an extent, because people will naturally relate. I mean, even if you say you put on the list EPP, SND, Renew Europe, etc., people would just associate that to the national politics. So unless you can manage to convince every single person to only talk about European politics, which is unlikely, there will be automatically the association to national politics, even if you put EPP, SND, Renew, etc., etc. That being said, you should put at the very least EPP, SND, etc., etc. So that at least you get the idea there. You should have a system that was the attempt of the Spitzenkandidat to tell to people, okay, if you vote for me, this is who would end up in the European Commission. So by voting for us, you have an impact on who will be the European Commission, because it's otherwise people can say, what's the point of me voting for the European election? Because it doesn't have any perceivable effect. It's not like the national election. In the national election, you vote for a party, you know who is going to be the potential prime minister at the end of the election if they win. So, even though you didn't ask him, he did come across as a pro-federalist. Yeah, I didn't ask him because he's not a politician, and that was not necessarily relevant to the discussion. But although he did say that he was, at some point in the conversation, he said it's not about necessarily putting everything at European level. You can also put things back at national or even regional level. So there was an argument about subsidiarity in there. It was not like he was not saying, "Oh, everything should be European and that's it." He said, "No, sometimes something will make more sense at regional level." For instance, I know of an entity that tried to get listed in the transparency register, but they never replied. So not very useful. What do you mean? I know of an entity that tried to get listed, but they never replied. Okay, I don't get what you mean, so sorry, clarify a bit. There should be a balance between national member state and European interests for European elections and new policy process. Agreed. Any other extreme is not fully inclusive or representative of the European... Yeah, okay, you agree. It's not something that goes... it's not 100% something or 100% the other. It's somewhere in the middle. And then depending on where you put, like if you put 60% more European or 60% more national, then that defines where you stand on the European politics. Up, sorry, going down. Miss Derry, the question regarding if he considers the Good Lobby as an NGO was in context if NGOs should be looked into more detail than today. Regarding Cartagate, as he said that NGO should not. He didn't say that NGOs should not be covered by new rules. He said what he said was that the issue is not NGOs per se. He said there's not a failure considered NGOs. Particularly, he didn't say that NGOs should be outside the scope of rules. That's not what he meant. Am I a federalist? The consecrated expression is that I'm I'm a recovering federalist. I used to be a federalist in my youth. I was young, naive. Now I have a bit more nuanced view, let's say. So. I believe in the ideals around that can justify federalism. That's what pushed me towards towards like getting working in EU politics and all that. But a European federation, I don't believe in it because I see, at least today, because I see a lot of like practical issues, political issues that would. Who don't have a solution necessarily or cannot be answered, just let's create a federation of Europe. But yeah, who knows in 100 years? Who knows? But for now, I'm a recovering federalist. Might be your bias regarding NGOs. Everyone has a bias one way or the other. Alright guys, it's been almost 2 hours. So unless you have a burning question that you want me to answer right now, I will start my conclusion. In any case, I hope that you... sorry, I put water everywhere on my desk, so I'm trying to think. Would I mind commenting the rumors about the US exploding Nord Stream 2? No, because I didn't read anything about it. I just saw on Twitter vaguely someone say, oh, US might have made the Nord Stream 2 explode, but that's it. So I have not read anything, so I don't have any informal opinion that I could... or analysis that I could provide you there. So, fortunately... I'm going to pass on this one. All right. So on this conclusion. So I hope that you enjoyed the interview. As usual, you didn't understand my point about subsidiarity in regard to federalism. My point about subsidiarity is that a lot of discussion when we're talking about federalism is that we should put all competencies at federal level. So. To summarize, in Brussels. And on the opposite, you have the proponent of Europe of nation states. Let's say it like that. We say no, principle of subsidiarity, competencies should say in national member state, because that's where it makes most sense. So if you caricature, you have one side saying subsidiarity in national member state, and the others say, no, let's put everything in Brussels, EU competence, because that way we can have an harmonized approach to everything. What he's saying, my point was, he's saying that he wants to create a pan-European political sphere, and to an extent transfer a number of things at EU level. But he also said that not everything has to end up in Brussels in terms of competencies, in terms of policies. Some things make sense at national level and even at regional level, and even imply at some point, maybe we should even take back some things from Brussels and put them at national level, at regional level. So it's that's my point about subsidiarity. It was saying that subsidiarity could make sense could be applied in the sense that you put competencies at regional level, because that's where it would make most sense. Because for him, the point of his approach is not about whether you should have a federal Europe or not. He has a citizen-centric approach. What matters for him is that, citizens are the center of the process, and that they are able to impact on decisions. And some things, it's easier to impact at regional level. It makes more sense for the regional level to define what the policy is. Yes, but even in France, you have decentralization and deconcentration. It's not much different, if you ask me. I think anti-feds are exaggerating yeah, of course, anti-feds are exaggerating the situation, just like the feds are exaggerating the situation. I mean, that goes both ways. Again, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But yeah. All right. Conclusion. Thank you for attending. I hope that you enjoyed it. As usual, if it's not already the case, do follow. If you have a Prime that is lying around, subscribe. It's always appreciated. It supports. You can, of course, follow my other social media, Discord, Twitter, Instagram, all the good things. Just click there and you have all the links. I will see you again on Wednesday for the news review in French, and on Thursday for the news review in English. So I hope to see you there. Otherwise, I will see you some other time. And do follow the other social media to find me and have the agenda and all that. And on this note, I wish you all a good evening, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.